All right, folks.
Yeah, right. Yeah, our offices. Yeah, that's our office.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for coming back.
My name is Nick. I'm one of the organizers. Together with Peter, we have coordinated the AI Do's and Don'ts panel, a panel that I'm very passionate about. I will give it over to Kevin, who will guide us through the discussion today. Thank you very much for coming.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that, and welcome everybody. This is like the universal door opener topic. You can mention AI in any group from roughly age 12 up to about age 86. Looking at my father-in-law, and someone will have an opinion on AI. So really excited to bring this panel together to share their views on kind of where AI has been trending within the finance function. What I thought we would do, just given we're toward the end of the day, keep the energy up a little bit. We're actually going to split the conversation into two parts. One is going to be how AI is transforming the finance function itself, and what's happening within the organization, the roles, the processes, et cetera. We'll allow some time for Q&A after the panel speaks on that. And then the second half of the conversation, we'll talk about finance's role in enabling the AI transformation in the broader enterprise. So how do you lean into and support the various functions that are all coming forward with AI use case requests, investments, et cetera at this time, and the challenges and opportunities that presents for the finance function. And we'll have some more Q&A at the end of that as well. So we'll allow you an opportunity to weigh in with your own questions. By quick introduction, I'm Kevin Bowen. I work for KPMG in the advisory practice. I'm overseeing our AI transformation effort in that space, and I'll let each of the panelists give a quick introduction of themselves and their company.
Sure. So I'm Cameron Heiser. I'm the CFO at Swoop. We provide a machine learning-based platform for healthcare companies and pharmaceutical companies to help them connect with their customers.
Hi, I'm Amanda McMaster. I'm the CFO of Boston Dynamics. We are a global robotics and AI company.
Hi, I'm Ken Stillwell. I'm the Chief Operating and Chief Financial Officer for Pegasystems. Pegasystems is a workflow company that helps to orchestrate scale process transactions across an organization, things like customer service, things around the ERP systems.
I'm Matthew Commons. I'm a consulting CFO with Venture Growth Partners. So I serve as a fractional CFO to several early stage tech companies, typically companies with less than 20 million in revenue. So happy to share my perspective on that. Thank you.
No, thank you all very much. I think it's unique timing that we're having this conference and this panel this week, because it was right about this week 3 years ago that ChatGPT kind of dropped onto the world. There's a long history of AI prior to that, but that's kind of the seminal moment that people started to associate with where AI became real. Kids are home from Thanksgiving, it's writing poems about the dog that sounds like Dr. Seuss, and it's really clever. And then a few smart people were like, wait, could it write a press release? And all of a sudden you're off to the races about what is this transformation going to look like. So I was just curious, what have you seen in terms of the changes in the finance function in those 3 years since that first initial drop a couple of years back? Ken, I may turn to you first on this one, and then others jump in.
Sure. So I think, as is pretty common with new technology, you kind of start with this it doesn't really work that well. And then you kind of jump to oh, wow, it'll change everything. And so I think we went through probably for the first 18 months or so this hot and cold of it's everything, it doesn't really work that well. Oh, wait, it really works well. So I think that in the finance function, what I've seen, from our business and also, I'm on the board of a few other businesses, and I think it's been pretty common across those where there was a little bit of trepidation around whether you could trust it, what it did, what you'd have to do with the information, would it, how much it would hallucinate, et cetera. But I think what you've seen now is, kind of at a macro level, AI is expected to be adopted across all parts of the operation, including finance. So if you're an organization that hasn't thought about how you use it in the quote to cash, in the procure to pay, in revenue operations and manufacturing, if that's relevant for your business, I think you're way behind. I think we're not quite at the point yet where there's crisp adoption of value at that scale, but I do think it's pretty much changed. The question comes up, how are you using AI pretty much in everyone's day?
Certainly, I think it's interesting that at the beginning, everyone was like, how am I going to implement AI? And now it's much more, how do your vendors implement AI? So there are a lot of interesting things that you don't have to do yourself. you can just leverage, Microsoft at the high end, but also any small vendor that's, doing workflow, accounting, everything else. They're all putting AI in, and I think it's interesting to think about how you can really leverage that in a way that, is helpful.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're seeing is early on, you decided how much of your problem to bring to AI, and you decided how much of the answer to use. But some of that control is being lost as these tools are rolling out. And I'm just curious, other challenges you've experienced over the last couple of years, either it's in adoption or in the technology itself? I mean, Ken, you kind of alluded to some of the concern and fear, but I don't know, Amanda, Matthew, anything you've experienced in terms of challenges over the time?
Yeah, I think it's everything that we've probably all experienced implementing transformative technology. It highlights where, especially in like a hyper-growth company like I'm at, it highlights any areas where you haven't, driven crisp business process or don't have the cleanest data. It becomes very clear very quickly. So it highlights that for you. I mean, it's everyone's priority, but I think that's been one of the biggest challenges is how do you take the tools and have meaningful end results, and that really it comes down to how good is the data that you have that you're using, how crisp are your business processes to drive those, and so those have been some of our challenges.
Yeah, I think one thing that started off as a huge challenge and is perhaps mitigating a little bit is sort of the need to be very, very thoughtful about the prompts that you're putting into these types of systems. I mean, I think at the beginning, you could use, early versions of ChatGPT and other things to do certain types of work, but you really had to be kind of a prompt wizard to kind of get it to do exactly what it is, and then you as the human are doing a lot of the thinking. I think with a lot of the more recent model releases, they're certainly directionally much better in asking follow-up questions and sort of prompting the user to say, well, hey, if the user's asking about me to design something in this area, maybe I should come back with some other questions. Maybe I should have follow-up questions and things like that, especially some of the 5.1 of ChatGPT or now Gemini 3 just out this week. I think they're getting a lot better about that. But still, you need to know what you want to get out of the model, and I think you need to be explicit about that, and it's certainly a challenge if you have somebody that just kind of asks for something and isn't extremely explicit about what you're trying to get.
Yeah, maybe just an additional, like a risk that maybe we didn't know 3 years ago that I think is pretty commonly understood now is the models are really sensitive to changes in data and sentiment. So the models are built. We didn't know this when they first came out, right? We were all just like, what's a good diet for a 55-year-old man through the course of a week? You're like, grilled chicken and broccoli. Okay, great. Like that's but I think what we're realizing is that if you actually ask the model a question, it wants to please you. The models are built to actually give you a helpful answer. That's like they want you to use it more. But that isn't necessarily the right answer. So I think if you learn the prompts are one way to do it, structuring the work and the model, like almost giving the model, that's where the kind of things you can do on the front end to help the model do the right thing. And I've even found, and you should test this out for yourself, ask it a question and then turn around and say, now be super critical in the answer, and you'll get a completely different answer. And so that's the nature of this evolution of AI. So structuring it is really helpful.
Yeah, there's a ton of confirmation bias in there, and you really have to actively work against it in order to do that. Because if you're saying I want to do X, it's going to try to help you do that and build you the best case. And it's very easy to lose your own critical thinking and just kind of fall in, oh, well, the model says this, so let's just go with it.
So I'm going to stick with that theme for a second, because what you're drifting into are the new skills that people have to have, right? The critical challenge, the prompting capability, even the vibe coding that's starting to become more prolific nowadays. What do you see as you look out over the next couple of years? How does the workforce in finance start to change? What skills are they going to need to have? What skills maybe you won't need to have any longer because of some of the capabilities that are coming online? What are some of your outlooks for that? I don't know, maybe Amanda, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think right now, and I think I heard the sentiment across every single speaker today, I don't think in the immediate short term we're not hiring our analysts. I think it's still important to have human in the loop. and to train those professionals to know what good looks like to validate this information that we're getting. But I could certainly see, 3 to 5 years down the road, when we start looking at the analytics side of things, that maybe some of those functions change a bit. Definitely, I see it as an opportunity. I'm a techno-optimist, so I see it as an opportunity to take some of those folks who spend quite a lot of their times analyze, getting the data, wrangling the data, now to be focused on really interpreting and making, business partnerships, becoming that financial operator in the business and business partners cross-functionally. So I'm optimistic about it, but I do think that will change.
Other views?
Yeah, certainly, as was the goal of all sorts of automation projects in finance, like the goal was always to take out the rote work. I think there's a, much better possibility that we get there, whether it's synthesizing a lot of information, whether it's following a path for different things, doing it in a way that's flexible and it doesn't have to be prescribed up front. Like all of that's coming. And, in the next 3 years, hopefully we make a lot of progress on that. If you think about what you need on top of that, you need creativity, you need people that understand what the output should look like. This is like what good looks like. And so, the shift will occur that being just transactional, following directions is probably not the best career path for people, but understanding how you're checking that, how you're making sure that things work well, how you're using that information to actually improve things, those are the things that we're going to be looking more and more for as we move forward.
Great. Yeah, I think as we look forward, I think we're still going to be in the world of sort of automating tasks as opposed to automating whole functions. And I think the people that you're going to be looking for are ones that can have the holistic perspective to try to see, okay, what tasks can I automate? I think any time that you have employee attrition or you're looking at new hires or whatever, we all kind of have to be thinking, okay, this is an opportunity for us to look at what can be done with AI. Even if you have attrition and you're going to hire a replacement, you're still going to have some type of a gap period where people are stressed and so forth, and that can be sort of an opportunity to look. And you need people that are kind of open and willing, at least to listen and share about what's possible.
Yeah, the interesting thing, and I think Amanda Cameron actually touched on this, is I'm not sure how useful models are if the results that you give to somebody, that person has no way of knowing what they mean and whether they're accurate and whether they're relevant. So that's kind of what both of them were talking about, is you're gonna, even if the models are super powerful, and I'm certain that they will be, there's no doubt in my mind, the real question is, what if they're wrong? Like, where does that correction come into play? Do you just let it be wrong, or do you allow someone? And within finance function specifically, one of the areas I think is this the whole vibe coding kind of thing that you had mentioned, Kevin. The vibe coding is a really incredibly cool way to get code built and replicated. But the reality is you need someone, an engineer, that actually can look at the code and say, is it good? Is it quality? Is it inefficient? And it's not right now. It's pretty generic. And so the creativity aspect of it is where it plays in. And if you're in a finance function asking it to write applications, we may not be equipped to actually look at the code. Many CFOs, I'm sure, are not, to be able to tell whether it's going to be an efficient runtime application. So those are the things that we're just learning, and we have to watch and try not to expect it to solve all problems.
No, I think that's something we're seeing in a lot of organizational functions today, where they've not had a traditional role for engineers in their domain, but there is some expectation now that everyone's going to bring a little bit of that capability, and the tools are going to get good, but there's still going to be a bridge to have to develop that skill set. Ken, to come back to you for a second, you mentioned a specific use of a red team before, as you think about overcoming the technical hurdles and the risks around this. Maybe just for those that aren't familiar with that approach, maybe just share your experience of what that is and how you've applied it to people, for people who may be struggling with some of that deployment.
Sure. So I'll try to make this high level but also not take too much time. So a lot of the certification, like we're a heavily certified organization, FedRAMP high, like we work with, the Department of Defense, we work with large organizations that will not allow us to deploy their solutions without certain levels of control because we handle a lot of consumer data, which in many countries is highly regulated. So that's kind of the background. When you leverage AI, what you have to do is you have to run the models through what's commonly called red team testing, which is you put prompts in, you look at the results that you get, you validate whether it's accurate, you kind of like document that the hallucinations / wrong answer, you're not necessarily, the answer doesn't have to be perfect, but you can't have an answer that like is, tell the customer, they're wrong, or whatever the thing is that's, So the red team testing is this concept of like trying to really validate the tool to the system, to the expected result. It's a little bit like testing in code in the product development lifecycle. And what you get from that is you get audit results that you can then use to validate use cases, prompt cleanup, things that you shouldn't do, things that you should do. And so it's actually a requirement around embedding OpenAI. If you use OpenAI, Microsoft actually requires you to actually do red team testing to make sure that you're not stealing intellectual property if you ask for a new logo, for example. So it actually makes you do some of that testing. So it's become a pretty common practice. We do it. We have a lot of AI embedded in the company, so we do it quite a bit.
So as I mentioned, we would bring the audience into this. Let's open it up now for Q&A specific to the question of how AI is transforming the finance function, and then we'll dive into how finance is enabling it in the broader organization in the second half. But any immediate questions around? We got one down here.
Yeah, there you go. So given the fact that if you're listening to any kind of podcast, unless it's like today's or yesterday's podcast, it's not worth anything. I listen to the AI Daily Brief. That's as good as it gets for me. Is there something like that for finance that we can be listening to or keeping? How are we keeping up with all this? I guess is really the question. Without hiring KPMG.
That's not a bad way to do it, just to clarify.
So I don't know if everyone here, if their CIO organization reports them, but for Boston Dynamics, the CIO org reports to me, and we're an AI company, so I can't walk out of my office without talking about it, usually on the product side, but as a consumer, the CIO spends his time being the most educated person about, specific products that are available that are considered best in class and the right way for us to be responsibly using it, et cetera, et cetera. So I spend probably once a week debriefing with him. So I guess my answer is hire really smart people who can be in your ear all the time, because you can't be everywhere and do everything, right? I think that aside from listening to great podcasts or reading what you can get your hands on, having someone who's dedicated to it, we have multiple people in the organization whose entire teams whose job is to be working with Harvard, MIT, et cetera, to be on the latest and greatest of what's happening in the AI field. So I'm in a privileged position, I know when I say that, but I do think I would lean heavily on very smart CIO.
So just an idea. It depends on the organization. If you have customers or vendors that you can get access to, that's one dimension, and employees is another one. So this may sound silly, but I actually try to get to every single customer where I know there's an AI discussion going on that is we have a lot of customers that come in for a briefing in our office, and I try to come in and sit down and ask a couple questions. What's new? What are you doing? What models are you using? Why did you change the models? What do you think? Just that little bits of information. On the vendor side, we have any vendor that we have where the spend is over $1 million a year. I've reached out and asked the vendor to do a presentation on how they're leveraging AI in their business. That helps to learn. I also walk the hallways, and I'm sure people are tired of hearing this, but like when I see people in the hallway, I'll say, hey, John, what'd you do with AI today? And it started to be like people would be like, and then people would come back to my office and have like PowerPoint presentation, like, I thought about your question. I was like, no, that wasn't the point. So just trying to
draft that for them.
yeah, exactly. So it's changing so fast that I just think getting as many touch points of information as you possibly can from different perspectives is a helpful, if you have the availability to do that, because I just think it's crowdsourcing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Customers, team members, vendors, all that, because these models are changing all the time, right? So like, I don't know, as I mentioned, Gemini 3 out now this week, but like myself, I don't know what it's good for necessarily, but like I'm gonna talk to people here and like out there and like, did you use it for X? Did you use it for a press release? Did you use it for taking unstructured data to structured data and whatever? Because these things are changing all the time. So just because in month 0, hey, Claude is best for this, or I had a really good experience, doesn't mean that something's going to change dramatically in the future. So it's more than one person can kind of pick up on.
I use AI to keep abreast of AI. So I have an agent that runs every morning that summarizes the news and announcements from my competitors and alliance partners on AI in the last 24 hours. So I can see how fast and where the ball moved in that time frame. And it's served up in a little 2-paragraph summary for me, and it lets me know where I need to go deeper. But I would also challenge the tool to help you keep abreast of the tools. Other questions on AI and finance? Yeah. There's 2 back to back there.
Hi, thanks a lot for a very interesting discussion. So I work with a lot of AI solution providers and vendors because I'm trying to look at how you can leverage technology to reduce manual tasks that you do in the office of the CFO, which there's a lot of. And I've also talked to a lot of CFOs over the last 6 months. And I think everyone agrees that spend management, AP automation, AR automation are probably the lowest hanging fruit to go after. But I've not seen a lot of people open up their pockets to actually go implement it. So I would love to hear if you've done any of that in your companies. And in my opinion, the barrier is education, but I would love to hear what you think is stopping people from actually going ahead and leveraging these wonderful solutions that are out there.
Yeah, I think that one of the barriers is that people think about buying something like that like they'd buy a technology solution, i.e., let's get it implemented, it's just automatically going to work on everything. And I think that the people that have tried that, like, they run into speed bumps along the way initially, because a lot of the technology, particularly if you're building your own stuff, is you actually need to train it just like you train an employee, right? You need to kind of prompt management, but in reality, you need to have it go do something, and then you need to look at it and say, actually, you should have done this a little differently, or you should focus on this aspect, or when you write an email to someone that owes you money, you need to be nicer to them, or you need to be more strict, or whatever it is. You need to impose your style, which I think that a lot of people, when they start out and they use it the first time, they're like, oh, well, this isn't all that great. And it's only when you stick with it, you kind of keep iterating with it and actually train it, just like you train a new employee, that you get to something that really works. And so, part of it is that actually takes a lot of work. Part of it is that I don't know that all the vendors that you'd use for, AP or whatever kind of have figured it out either entirely. So like, as those things start to improve and people get more experience with it, I do think you're going to see an acceleration. But you're right, like a lot of finance teams, they don't do all of their dunning and bills and everything else through AI, and they don't pay all their bills or categorize things through AI yet. But like, that's coming pretty quickly.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think because it's been around 3 years, it is just starting to get good. And I also think and I know I'm a business process psycho, but as you're looking at these, I think folks have been doing RPA robotic process automation, where they're automating these tasks, and now you're being forced to take a step back when you think about embedding AI into these processes to say, have I been doing it the best way? Now, is there new ways to do this? And likely, when you're thinking about lead to cash or procure to pay, these are cross-functional, very disruptive flows throughout your whole business. So you're now saying, not only do I need my finance team focused on this, I need to grab the whole, leaders of the organization cross-functionally. So the planning process, and I can say this because I'm doing this right now, and it's a much longer process than I would like it to be. I'm losing patience, but it's necessary, right? And I understand the necessity of it, that you want to measure twice, cut once. And so I think before folks are going to open their pockets for these really large investments, they want to know that they're actually putting the right information in play.
I don't. My personal experience is that the cost of using AI is not the barrier; it's the change management. And so what I did, our CIO reports to me as well. What I did was I made AI the number one initiative of our CIO to enable all of the data mapping across the organization so that then any of the groups could plug in to the structure of the data and how they could leverage it for different models and for different use cases. If you leave it up to the functions, they will struggle because they'll be looking at buying tools. They won't actually be looking at actually changing their workflow, their process, and how they actually do the work. So my first piece of advice was, if your CIO or whoever that person is in your organization isn't the person equipping the organization, you're probably going to have starts and stops in terms of value. And then once that is done, then I think you need to set it on the business owners to say, it's all there for you. I see the bills for what we pay and we use a lot of model consumption. It's really not that much, right? I don't think that's the issue. I think it's change management. So
There's another question here, I think.
Yeah, maybe you already started to answer that. We discussed this morning that for small tasks, we may have different tools. And Amanda, you started to say that is it the right thing to do to replace existing processes with AI tool or completely revisit the process? And then, do we have the right people to say, okay, what I've done the last 20 years, I should do differently, and really step back totally and think creatively of a new process that could leverage AI a little bit more than just iterative improvement?
Yeah, I tout people, process, platform, right? And platform could be platforms or tools, and you need all three. And just putting a tool in place doesn't really solve your problems if you don't have the first two nailed. And the first one is the toughest. I think people is the toughest answer, because likely if you're asking that question, like, did the person who got me here, are they going to get me there? Intrinsically probably already know the answer because they're not doing the things that show you that they're preparing for the future. Not always, but it's been my experience. But getting the right people, right, that are change agents that want to embrace this technology and understand the very long road that it's going to likely take when you're talking about business process change and change management, and then selecting the tool that's going to be the most effective.
One small thing to add. If you think about like a simple example in our lives, if you had a lawnmower to cut your grass and you bought a sports car, you wouldn't try to cut your grass with a sports car. So the use case of AI is really important. It isn't everything for everything. So there are going to be tools where AI is incredibly inefficient to do it, like journal transactions in an ERP. Like, the system is built to be very efficient at how it transacts. AI will make that more complicated and more costly, and you don't get any value. So I think thinking about the use cases is like super important to think about, like, where you need to change, because it's a clumsy process. It's human, lots of humans, et cetera. And I think one of the biggest observations in finance is how much people look to what they think are the most complicated things, that really there's such small incremental value from using AI, and then like miss the other big things. That's your 20 years I've been doing it this way kind of thing.
I'd like to ask a question about a topic that I haven't heard brought up this afternoon about artificial intelligence. So when I think of AI, I think of different classes of techniques, right? Agentic AI, generative AI, large language models. And, there's one, using it to summarize news or having your kid help with homework is one thing. Using it to derive business value that you then resell involves sometimes, in the case of some of these tools, models that have been trained on publicly available but protected information, right? So for example, the New York Times, other people have sued some of these AI companies saying, you've trained your model on our information that we own the copyright to. And so when you, in your organizations, look to use some of these tools to help your business and derive business values, can you comment, please, on how you think about measuring, being aware of, mitigating potential legal liability from the second-order infringement of this, that kind of danger, that kind of exposure?
Red team testing was that point that I made earlier. Whatever you call it, you have to know what the downside risk is. The downside risk could be copyright infringement. The downside risk could be a bad process. The downside risk could be not appreciating that someone's calling with an intent to commit suicide on a helpline and you didn't pick it up. Like, what are the bad things that could happen, and how do you either don't do that with AI and actually involve a human, or you stop it? So I think that you have to think about the bad stuff and then try to test the model to see if the bad stuff happens. I think there are some things. My personal opinion is I would be very uncomfortable going into a model and saying, based on these symptoms, what should I do next if I was having some serious health issue? I would probably like to have a human with an assist as opposed to just going and doing a Google search. I don't know that the answer is right or wrong. I'm just saying, personally, but I've actually seen the models work, and there's a lot of risk there with serious consequence decisions like intellectual property infringement. So I think you just got to know your risks and then test for them.
And certainly it becomes a governance thing at the end of the day. You need to make sure that you're contracting with the various different folks in terms of how you're doing it. You need to set out guardrails on, in my mind, we use a lot of AI for things that we push out to customers, and then we use a lot of AI for things that are internal. I have a higher risk tolerance for, stuff that's internal, right? I'm going to put internal controls. I'm going to, manage it in a different way. Whereas if I'm pushing it out to customers, I care a lot about if there's copyright infringement or, IP problems. And so the contracting, who you're dealing with, what sort of, legal repercussions kind of come out of that are things that, you should put a lot of thought into early on.
And I think AI can actually help implement those guidelines as well. So, is your messaging on brand? Are you dealing with copyright infringement issues? I mean, those are the perfect examples of things that, especially things that are going out publicly or to customers, that this can really help automate and have a tighter process generally.
So I'm going to use that question to pivot to the second half of our discussion, which is the role of the CFO and the finance organization as an enabler to this broader transformational change, right? The enterprise itself, whether it's the value proposition, whether it's the cost and operating models of the business, all of that is being transformed, with different industry benchmarks, et cetera. What's the role of the CFO to help both instigate that change where it feels like the organization's not moving fast enough, but also then govern and control and allocate and prioritize where we're going to change? Because the use cases are rampant, right? Every function, every role has a demand and a need for this space. How are you all leaning into that challenge? Amanda, I might come back to you first for this one.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, from a productivity tools perspective, we've leaned way in, and I would say my office and the office of the CIO, it is a focal point for everyone to be using. We're Google Shop, so we use Gemini. We bring AI to everything. I think I got the stats before I came here that of our 1,000 employees, 990 of them are using the productivity tools. So that's pretty wide adoption. And they had segmented reporting of how we're using it. It's pretty cool. Like, we're bringing AI to everything from an internal perspective. And then, of course, we're building robotic foundation models and such. So it's slightly different than reselling other AI platforms. We're building the AI. So I think I, again, have a slightly different population of people who are really open to it. So the change management is not quite as challenging. But I could understand in like previous lives in other organizations where embracing new technology is scary for people. So.
Other experiences, other ways you're influencing or shaping the direction?
I mean, I think just being able to share in an open way, and in a somewhat humble way as well about like let's learn from each other and so forth. I mean, Ken, I think you gave the example of like of talking to people and they come into the office and they're giving you a PowerPoint on how they're using AI, which was not really the point. But it's like, hey, can we have a brown bag and we're kind of sharing about how we're doing this and what's working and what's not working. And because again, to go back to the underlying point that these base models are evolving so quickly. It's really important to share and have that kind of open collaboration. That doesn't necessarily have to be like a specific initiative that we're measuring and is so super structured. It can be a lot more informal. But if there's a lot of encouragement about sharing how people are using different tools in what ways, it can be enormously helpful.
So I'll use maybe analogy on this, which I think CFOs can play this role. So if you think about, for any of you that have played a sport or had children play a sport, before the season starts, you typically do some type of physical conditioning. You run, you do whatever. It's to prepare you. The role of the coach is to establish the pattern. We're going to get up at 6 in the morning. We're going to do this. We're going to lift. We're going to run. We're going to do whatever that is. And that is, if that was not done, I would suspect that many of the players on the team would not show up for that. So there's a certain level of like governance and structure. So think about the CFO now with the organization. You can do simple things like go to your customer support area and say, listen, our business is growing 15%. I need you to be able to scale over the next 3 years by supporting, a 15% annual growth each year. And I need you to do it with 10% less people. And I want to understand how you're going to do that with AI and what you need from the organization. And then you, like I said, go to the CIO, what I mentioned earlier, and say, I'm going to all the groups, and we're going to set bars on how we actually get scalability and reduce friction and automate, and I need you to be an enabler for that. So I think in the CFO role, you can play, even though those individuals don't necessarily report to you, you can play a coaching role analogous to a sports coach to set the expectations, to set the schedule, to set the conditioning for the organization. So that's very easy to do as a CFO because, naturally you control or you have heavily influence on the budget, on financial resources, et cetera. So that's a way to do it even when those individuals may not report to you or have to, quote, answer to you. I think you can still set the discipline around it.
Yeah, Ken, our role at the end of the day are resource allocators for the business. How much are we spending here? How much are we spending there? I find it interesting that part of it depends on where you are in the stage of your company's use of AI. I think when you're a little further along, you can say, yeah, you need to become more efficient by X%. When you're earlier on, I actually think as a resource allocator, you need to lean less into what's the ROI of this particular investment. Because at the end of the day, like you said before, the actual models and running stuff isn't actually that expensive. It's easy enough for you to try stuff. So investing in something that's more of the platform that can enable everyone to get benefit out of whatever it is you're doing, whether it's creating a workspace or getting the data in the right place, like all of those things are foundational to actually making it work in the long term. And you can't go to someone and say, I'm going to give you $1 million to invest in this, and whether it's training time or just having the thing, how much money are you going to give me back? At the beginning, you actually have to say, I need to make room for this somewhere. Let's invest the $1 million and not expect to get it back this year, but it is going to come next year or the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a corporate utility function. I mean, it's more like equivalent to email. I mean, it's not like asking like, okay, well, what's the ROI on email? You know, it's like, no, it's just something that you use every day, and it's inherent in what you do. And I think AI is increasingly, you know, going like that. I mean, certainly for things like basic things like search. I mean, I probably use AI for like 75% of what I might have used search for at one point. You know, I think a lot of this, I mean, again, there are certain elements and modules and so forth that you know, do need to be evaluated on a discrete ROI basis. But I think, you know, generally speaking, as we look at this, that's perhaps might be the wrong framework.
No, I think the analogy to email is so apt because no one's going to go back to paper memos in the mail system, right? And AI is not going back in the bottle. It's that we are in the AI era forever. It's always going to keep getting better and more pervasive. To the point, Cameron, that you were raising just about kind of thinking about the platform plays and the ROI, we've been advising our clients to think about the return in kind of 3 buckets. There's some really low-hanging fruit. I had a client in the tools manufacturing business, and they saved $12 million on translation cost using AI, right? So that was just an easy use case, right? And they said it was valuable, it was material, $12 million goes to the bottom line. They'd end up no deferred cost there. Then there's the change dependent, right? Which goes back to the human side of the equation that we've talked about, which is we know the technology can do it. Are the people adopting it, and are we modeling the processes around the technology capability? And the last is the reimagining, like fundamentally think this from scratch in a new process flow, whether it's order to cash or something of that nature. What would an agentic level answer look like in this space? How are you all thinking about the ROI in a portfolio way, or assessing, you know, not necessarily the dollar for dollar return, but the progress the organization's making towards, you know, whatever the AI future is for your business or your industry?
I mean, I always think about it the way that Ken thinks about it, which is we should be able to be more efficient. Ultimately, you know, everyone's company out there has a probably margin target that you have over the next like 5 years. You know, for my company, like we're basically already there. We're, you know, very cash flow generative, very profitable company. So I take the approach of I want everyone to be more efficient so that we can reinvest all those dollars that we're saving back into growing the company more. Yep. Other companies are going to have a different point of view. If you're, you know, if you're losing money as a startup and you want to get to the point where you have 30 or 40% margins, like, you know, you're going to use that efficiency to ultimately get up to that point as you scale. And I do think that a lot of the conversations that you can have are, and not everyone's company is growing, you know, 40, 50%, but even if you're growing 15% or 20%, you can totally have the conversation of, look, we need the existing resources to become more efficient so that we can scale without adding as much, you know, new headcount or new resources or new capital or whatever it is. And so honestly, like AI doesn't change my point of view around that. It just makes it more feasible, or makes it easier for people to see the path of either using your incremental profitability or efficiency to reinvest back into the business, or to ultimately get to you know, profit margin that you're comfortable with.
I would say for anybody who has a child thinking about managing and localization management, you should probably have them pick a different major. Like, so there are obvious use cases that are they're just slam dunk. So in any organization, you're gonna look at those and go, obviously that's valuable. Like I think someone on one of the panels talked about using AI to, like, you know, do a draft of your earnings script, or to get an FAQ from your results. Like, those are really easy use cases because they don't have to be right. They can just be close, and then it's useful information. Then there's go to the other extreme. The other extreme is where you've completely reimagined your business and that AI is the central point behind it. My advice to CFOs, and this is going to be maybe against our DNA a little bit, my advice would be, try to encourage your organization to think about how AI can change the offering that you do for your customers as a priority over saving headcount and cost internally. Because I think the savings cost internally are just going to happen automatically. I just think I don't even know how hard you're going to have to push for that to just happen. But I think figuring out how can either disrupt you or how it can help differentiate whatever that offering is so much more valuable, and quite frankly will help you from a career standpoint, because it'll change your persona, if it isn't already, to be much closer to what the CEO cares about, which is not to get 3 more points of margin. It's going to be to get 3 more points of growth. So that would be my, high level on the transformational.
Matthew, you're seeing this in a couple different industries in your kind of role as a fractional CFO. Any unique characteristics or differences you're seeing across your portfolio of clients?
Yeah, well, I guess I've got some clients that have some exposure directly to the energy industry, which I think is in particular facing a huge amount of kind of macro level change because of this. So I've got one client that does reverse energy auctions, so they help customers in deregulated states buy power cheaply, and that includes hospitals and manufacturers and also data centers. And these used to be like 20 megawatts was a big data center, but now the trends are just crazy. So like these new data centers, like they need power plants themselves. Like their 250 is a small one, 250 megawatts. So certainly it's changing the industry from what was sort of a sleepy industry with like not much growth in electric power to something that we're now kind of back at the growth rates we had sort of like post World War II in terms of this, and just having to totally reimagine this. So I think for all CFOs out there, I mean, obviously there's going to be upward pressure on energy prices, certainly electric prices, because of this, and it's just a huge macro level thing that I don't think people have necessarily appreciated. One of the folks that I've listened to that I think is particularly insightful here is a guy by the name of Leopold Aschenbrenner. He graduated from Columbia at 19 and was valedictorian, then worked for OpenAI, and now is running his own hedge fund. So he wrote about a year ago a series of blog posts called Situational Awareness, where he kind of goes through, and it's sort of like a Moore's Law style scaling, where Moore's Law was kind of looking at, the size and performance of semiconductors. He's looking at a macro level about where are we going with sort of energy, data centers, these types of things, where, without too much craziness, you just kind of extrapolate these trends a few years, and you're rapidly getting to like substantial portions of the electric output of states or countries, from doing this, and it doesn't seem to be really slowing down. I mean, we're dealing with these questions now about, how sustainable is this? Are we in an AI bubble and everything else, which I think are important for a lot of things about just where's the economy headed anyway. But but this is real. I think you have to sort of come to terms with what is happening at the macro level, and I think especially in the energy sector, you're being forced to, because it is it is a complete change in the macro environment that we have now than what we had 3 years ago.
So we've got about 7 minutes left. So why don't we let's open it up to the floor if you guys are open to that. Thoughts?
So with any technology implementation or upgrade, we always wonder about user adoption challenges, right? Sometimes users say, hey, I don't like this tool. Do you see AI adoption being less of a challenge, given most of us are using ChatGPT on a personal level?
I mean, I think if you're selling it, it's all about ROI. If you're, what we do as an example is, we use machine learning and AI to generate better advertising segments for healthcare companies. Like, the adoption's pretty simple. It generates a better segment. You get better results. You end up selling more as a result of that. And, big companies, they test all those things. So, ultimately, I don't worry about adoption if it's markedly better and people can measure those results. Where I would worry about it is if it's just doing something that was already done and you don't see that improved ROI. I think most people would tell you that, AI will deliver those better results, so I'm not super worried about the adoption.
Maybe one area that you could have some headwind is employees are a little paranoid about adoption of AI in their own jobs. And so I do think you could have some level of like subconscious sabotage around AI productivity because they may view it as disrupting the way they operate. So educating and trying to have a good message around why this is good for them, their own development, and it will be, is probably helpful for that adoption. But I could see that. I haven't seen it at scale, but I do. There's a big change management resistance that people are, especially not younger people, because they're used to using it. It's more like the 40 and above population of which I'm in. Like it's a, you know, they're kind of like set in their ways, right? And so I do think that's a reality.
I think something related to that, I mean, it's like, okay, are people adopting it, but are they adopting it in the wrong way? I mean, there's a huge risk that you just end up with slop here and have people that just kind of accept what the AI says, and it's just assuming something that is not correct. I mean, it's either hallucinating or it's, you know, just you didn't provide enough parameters. So I think going back to a point that Amanda made, I mean, you need to have somebody that is reviewing the final version that is sufficiently skilled to know what is slop and what is not. Because if you have somebody that is extremely junior and they, you know, put some prompts into AI and they get something that kind of, at just like a high level glance, like, yeah, seems kind of sort of right, it could have a lot of things embedded in it that are quite problematic, especially if it's used for anything other than just internal purposes. I mean, training, and also I think going back to sort of this issue of kind of governance. I mean, there needs to be real ownership of the product that is going out, whether internal or external. And I think, yeah, I mean, certainly training, but also kind of oversight and expectation management that, you know, I mean, we maybe heard about the case very early on of the lawyer who sent in this brief you know, to the judge, and it had all these hallucinated, made-up cases that were cited in there. You know, I mean, that's sort of an extreme example that like these cases don't exist, right? And but I think it happens at a much more, you know, much more subtle level, or things. It's very easy to have errors embedded in here that are, you know, completely unintentional and easy to overlook.
Yeah, one down here.
Hi, Andrew McDonald with Workday. Thanks for a great panel. Can you share a little bit about your POV on building AI technology versus buying it through acquisition versus lease? Maybe you're partnering with Gemini, Databricks, et cetera.
Where to start? It's very, very expensive no matter what you do. No, I think I know I'm oversimplifying a very complicated conversation, but I'm a simple woman, and I basically just say, you know, it's like all decisions we make of make versus buy, which is, you know, what is the better product, and is it cost effective to do it, or is it a material differentiator for you in your industry? So in robotics, it's not an option to not be building, right? That is a requirement. But when I think about it from a consumer side, on the internal use side, it wouldn't make sense for us to spend the amount of money that these, you know, OpenAI, Google, you know, DeepMind, Physical AI, what they're spending on building these AI tools is billions and billions of dollars. So it wouldn't make sense to do that for productivity tools. So it makes way more sense for us to buy when you're using it internally. And if you're talking about selling a product, it depends on the product you're selling. If you're in the sector where having this technology embedded in your solution is the competitive differentiator, I would say I would strongly encourage you to be building it. But if it's something that you can white label and it doesn't really move the needle and it's commoditized, why not save the margin points?
I think one aspect that will become more important in the future is, and this is probably more for very large enterprises with more custom systems, but is this whole idea of GPU versus TPU. So most of the systems and the models today are built on NVIDIA GPUs or similar. You know, they can do a lot. They're general purpose. Google is different because they, like Gemini 3, almost entirely trained and deployed on TPUs, tensor processing units. It's a sort of a specific higher efficiency, and they don't sell them. So if you want to do something on a TPU, you have to do it through Google. They will not sell it. But there are a lot of downsides to it and a lot of customization needed, and you're going to lock yourself into the Google ecosystem. But there's a lot of fundamental advantages in efficiency and power consumption that, in theory, you can get from TPUs. So we're not seeing that much today, but again, Gemini 3 out this week. I know I've said it a few times, but it is something that I think is the start of a trend, that we have something that is, a world-class foundation model that is entirely TPU based. I think we'll see more of that. And right now, Google's the only one that has them, and they don't sell them.
Maybe one more question from your side, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask, one do and one don't, as we'll wrap it up. Just to go back to the original mandate of the panel. So, something you'd offer, one do and one don't for the group?
Sure. I think my do would be kind of know what you want the AI to do. I think you have to give it structure when you're going in there, whether prompting or otherwise. And don't exclude a sufficiently skilled human from oversight of this. I think we can't. There's definitely a risk of losing our own creativity and judgment. Whether it's doctors looking at an MRI and they're like, oh well, the AI said this is it, and it can lead to major errors. But in all types of work, so. Make sure to keep a human in the loop and be aware that there's a risk of just going with what the AI recommends.
Do, I would say, is try to embed AI in your employee messaging, your management meetings, your any of your catch-ups, when you have presentations, have people summarize in AI. Just really start, just every chance you can get, use simple ways to get people comfortable with it and see the value. And it's really, just start today, and you'll see the very easy areas for your business. So that would be my do. And my don't would be, don't be. They say that investment community, overestimates the next 24 months of technology and underestimates the 5-year period. So using that theme, you have to be kind of realistic with the pace and what you can get done. And I think having like an optimistic but scrutinizing eye, I think, is helpful to kind of keep the balance of not getting hyped into things and thinking that AI is going to solve everything, but but not being negative on it either.
They took all the good ones. I would say do.
Think about it if you're me.
No, sorry, Cameron. Do exploit the opportunities that are out there to utilize AI. I think we've been framing it as problems, and I think there's a lot more opportunities that exist than problems. There certainly will be challenges, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. And then don't take the human out of the loop. They're still really necessary.
All right. So my do is going to be think about the data that you're putting in and do some upfront work to make sure that you're not pushing garbage into a model, because if you push garbage into a model, you're going to get garbage out of the model. If you're able to, and frankly, you could use AI to clean stuff up, identify anomalies, whatever else, but do that first before you start, expecting results. And my don't's going to be, don't give up if it doesn't work the first time, because it's probably not going to, at least not to the really high expectations, kind of piggybacking on Ken's. You need to work with it, you need to train it, you need to teach it in order for it to get really where it needs to go.
So mine, I'll do my own closing part. Do go visit some startups. They're thinking differently about this. So go out to Silicon Valley, talk to some VC firms. You will see not only new technology and new frontiers for what AI is doing, but new ways of thinking about org design. We're pushing AI into legacy 40-year-old organizational models. New companies are not going to hire a 50-person finance team. They're going to think radically different about how to solve for those problems. And I would say don't get complacent. The new capabilities that come out every time, you think you knew what the state of the art was, check around, something else has probably moved the needle a bit more. And what wasn't something that was useful for AI 6 months ago, AI can now be pretty good at with the latest tools. So you have to stay abreast of it. It's tiring. I try and do it every day, but it's worth it. So panelists, thank you very much. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, everybody. Amazing insights. The next session starts at 3:45 in the large auditorium with Shopify.